you're sitting on a bench. You see these insect things going around, like moving around fast in the background. And then this one main being that you feel is female is sitting there with its legs up, staring at you.
Yeah.
And is it communicating? It's asking you, how can I help you stop screaming?
No, there was an automatic voice. A machine was saying that.
Oh, so this wasn't inside you. This was external.
No, it was outside me.
Okay.
It was a voice. I was not in any way prepared to do telepathy at that time. I was too excited and upset to even think about that. I couldn't have done it. I can do it now fairly easily, but no, not at that moment. I didn't even know it existed.
And this is when they're trying to prepare you to, they have this tool and they essentially sodomize you with it.
Yeah, well, what they do is, and it's a known thing. It's not a mysterious thing from the beyond. It's it's used to this day in animal husbandry, and in those days they made these devices that would stimulate the nerve that causes an erection.
Right.
And for people who had erectile dysfunction before Viagra, they would insert this into their rectum and turn this on. It would create a gentle electrical current, and the result was an erection. And then the person could ejaculate, could have sex.
Right.
And as I say, when they're getting semen out of a bull, they do it now. It's a commonplace tool. It's nothing exotic.
So they wanted your semen. They wanted to stick a needle in your brain. And then what else did they do?
Send me the hell home. And I woke up the next morning all upset, not knowing why.
And also during the experience, you said you have no right to do this. And they said, we do have a right.
We do have a right, yes. Yes, what did that mean?
Yeah, what do you make of that?
Well, there's a lot of possibilities. Maybe it's on some soul level. I don't know. Higher level. If so, they would have been nice if they'd explained themselves at any level, but in any case, they didn't. Well, the other possibility is, what if we did have contact with them back in the past? What if the Eisenhower meeting actually did take place? What if there was an agreement and they did agree to let a certain number of people be dealt with in this way, and I think hybridized? That would be one of the greatest secrets the United States possessed. And, I think that's a possibility too.
That they are crossbreeding humans and their own.
Oh, I know they are, because they did it to me, and I met the child in the woods behind my house.
Your own child.
I guess he was my child. At the time, I didn't know what he was, but I'll tell you the story. I was out walking in the woods one afternoon in August it was hot, and we would leave. We were losing the house, in the process of losing the house. And because, unfortunately for me.
The cabin,
yeah. A writer who's controversial, people will buy. But as soon as he becomes a laughingstock, forget it. They're not going to buy that anymore. They're not going. This is before the internet. They're not going to go to a bookstore and put down money on a book where the clerk's going to snicker at them. And whoever turned me into a laughingstock over the rape. Basically, they turned it into the rectal probe. It shows up on the first episode of South Park as.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And after that, it spread.
So that was the genesis of the anal probe, your story?
Yeah.
No one ever talked about that before you?
No.
Wow.
No.
Oh my God.
And so I've ended up in the situation for 30 years of being laughed at for being, which is an interesting position to be in, believe me, especially because my publishers felt like that story, as it spread, was destroying my sales, because my sales just absolutely dried up. And I wasn't even writing about this anymore. And I was having good sales with some of my books. And then the next thing you know, they just start to die out. And I ended up with no money and no publisher and nowhere to turn. We had to give up the cabin. It was sold out of bankruptcy. We were just destroyed, absolutely. Ann and I had to borrow money from friends to eat at one point. It was horrible.
Yeah.
And so in any case, Where were we?
You were saying that you were walking through the woods and you had a reason to believe that you saw like a hybrid child of yours.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I'm walking in the woods, and behind my house, there was a wooded area, then a cleared area going up a hill with a lot of rather rocky, and then beyond that, some pitch pines. And there's this boy sitting under a tree, right, 50 feet from the pitch pines, smoking a cigarette.
A boy.
A boy. He looked like a boy from a distance anyway. And he was a boy, I found out later, but I'll get to that. So I think to myself, what in the world? What's a kid doing out here? And I figured, well, I understand he's out here, so he wants to smoke, and he's not going to be smoking at home. And it's like a 10-year-old or 12-year-old maybe. So I understood.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, but he's too close to those pitch pines. If those things catch fire, this whole area is going to go up like a torch, because pitch pines are full of pitch. That's why they're called pitch pines.
Okay.
And you light one on fire, and whoosh!
Oh, wow.
It just explodes. So I walk over to him, and I start to say, "I'd like you to move," or words to that effect. And I realize as I'm looking down at him, he's like a weathered child. I know that now because he didn't have adequate hydration and he smoked all the time.
Okay.
And I got to know more about him over the next few weeks, you may be sure. And he makes this, he's looking straight ahead. He doesn't look at me, and he goes, "Ugh." And I think to myself, it was more menacing than that.
Yeah.
I think to myself, I'm significantly far back in these woods. And I didn't like that sound, and I don't like this kid at all. I'm getting out of here. And I turn around and go back to the house. And I tell Ann that there's this kid out there, and she says, we should call the sheriff. And I think about that, and then I think, I don't want to call the sheriff because people around here are very sensitive. And if I call the sheriff on one of their children, they're not going to like it, whether the child is doing right or wrong, because I've already got a horrible reputation in the area. Some people who had been doing clearing some poison ivy out of our trees had one of the grays walk across the road in front of them, and then they had these snakes come up around their feet and stuff. And the foreman came up to me and said, "Mr. Strieber, we're leaving. Those people of yours are running around out there, and we don't want anything to do with them." And they left. They wouldn't even take any money from me, and they also didn't finish the job. So that kind of story was getting around the neighborhood, and people weren't happy with that.
Mm-hmm.
They were not pleased. And so I didn't want to have any trouble with anyone with calling a sheriff on their kid.
Okay.
So I let that go. The next thing we know, we're smelling cigarette smoke in the house. In the night, it's warm nights, windows are open. And I'm thinking to myself, is that kid out there? And we begin to find places where he has been standing, and there'll be hundreds of cigarette butts. If it was 20 years later, we could have taken some of these cigarette butts and gotten them DNA tested. Mm. But that wasn't real in those days. You couldn't do that. So I said to Ann, he's out here. And we took a lovely hike. We looked like to hike up to this lake up in the hills. Beautiful. And on the way out in the woods, 3 or 4 miles out in the woods, we're going along, and we find one of these places where he's been standing. And we just went home. We realized those woods weren't ours anymore. That we knew by this time that there was something real weird going on. We liked to skinny dip at night, and our pool was very private, so no problem skinny dipping at night. And we would skinny dip frequently. One night after he started in those woods, we were skinny dipping. And remember, the woods behind the house, there was a deck with a pool in it, and then thick brush. And under that brush behind that brush were tall trees. So behind the brush, there was a clear area that you couldn't see into from the deck. And suddenly there's a sound of someone running up and down in that clear area, breaking sticks and gasping. He could not speak. He could only gasp and make mouth noises. I found out later. And we realized it's him. And he's upset about the idea that we are in this pool, naked. And so we went back in the house. We didn't feel comfortable anymore outside because we obviously weren't alone. And this kid was upset, and it was very weird. And we both knew by this time this is no normal child. Because a normal child, no human being can smoke that much and live. And no normal child is in your woods all the time and never seems to be anywhere else. So we lived with him there, coming up to the house, and it was not pleasant. And he came into the house a few times, and he slept a few nights in one of the bedrooms, and we would find the bed unmade, like someone had slept in the morning, and the cigarette smoke everywhere. It was not pleasant. So,
was he smoking in your house?
He smoked in the bedroom, yeah, but apparently with the door closed, because we didn't notice it while it was happening.
So who is this kid?
Well, I'll get to that. Give me some time. We got some time, don't we?
Yeah,
okay.
We got some time. Do you know, you've heard of David Huggins?
Yes.
What do you make of him? Have you ever met him?
No. Well, I don't like to talk. Well, you tell me what you make of David. You asked me a question about David Huggins.
I watched his documentary, Love and Saucers, and I found it absolutely fascinating. I don't know what to make. I know Jeffrey Kripal met him. He was in the documentary.
Yeah.
He seems like he truly, genuinely believes what he says about his story of this woman who looks like a half alien, half woman. She has long hair.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that she looked anything like the 3-foot being with the big head, but she did say it had big eyes, but it was far more human, like a Nordic-looking human woman with blonde hair, I believe.
Yes.
And she had sex with him, and then she came back, and then she showed him the children that she bore from him.
Yeah.
He met the children. He drew these beautiful paintings of this woman with big breasts.
Right, I know the story. Okay.
The story is fantastical, and it sounds like something that you could laugh at, right? Or you could just be like, oh, what a crazy cuckoo guy this is. Well, but it seems to be very similar to a lot of the things you're saying.
Well, the mind becomes, it gets a need to connect the dots. In other words, there may be less to the actual story than he's telling. But I will say this, I know David believes every word of it. And I also would think that the part of the encounter is true. And at least some children are true. And the reason I think that is I turned one of those women down when they tried to have sex with me.
So you never had any like physical intercourse as humans would
that's not
with one
true.
of these beings?
I did have.
Oh, you did?
I certainly did.
When was this?
It was must have been in 88, 89 maybe.
And how did this happen?
Okay, I'll tell you the whole story. I woke up in a state of full erection, lying on my back with a female whom we got to know quite well. She never sat down in the living room and chatted with us. She's in the house a lot. I can tell you more stories about her, too.
Is this the main female entity you normally see?
I don't know if it's the same one.
Okay.
I can't tell.
Look similar or no?
Yeah, it looks similar, only she was somewhat human. For one thing, she had sexual organs, and the little ones that you usually see don't have sexual organs.
Anything
No,
like
they're
that.
not, because they're grown. They're not born. And at least that's what I would assume. Because if they don't have sexual organs, obviously they're not having sex and not having babies.
Right.
But they're there, therefore they must be grown. So anyway, this is what happened. I wake up and I'm engaged in sex already with this individual. It's well along. I look up and I cannot see the face. The face is blacked out. But the body is a female body.
Breasts?
With very small but existent breasts, thin arms, and legs that were human. Like it's a half human, half alien, half a gray human person.
Okay.
The room is filled with people. including the room is filled with people, including one of them who I recognize. He's an intelligence officer whom I've known at that point for years. And I have, at that moment, the most extraordinary experience of sex I've ever had in my life, despite the situation. It was brain-bending and terribly upsetting to me because I was a married man and I'm very chaste. I'm not going to be comfortable fooling around. Recently
What was so good about it?
It was just incredibly intense, and it was like a Kundalini experience. It was so intense. It was just my whole body. I climaxed not with but with my entire body. It was brain-bending. I'll never forget it.
Wow.
And I told Annie about it immediately because I had to. But the truth was, I came awfully close with her a number of times because one thing about my wife is she knew what she was doing in bed.
Right.
Anyway, the next morning I wake up, I'm back in my bed. I've had sex and Annie hasn't. It's quite clear the way I look and feel and smell. And I tell her the whole story immediately, of course, because, there's no way. I mean, if I'm going to fool around, I sure as hell, I'm not going to fool around with anyone because I really love my wife.
Right.
And, she's the only woman aside from her that I've ever even had sex with.
This is in the cabin, by the way?
In the cabin, yeah.
Okay.
In the old cabin. In
New York.
In New York, yeah. So I think to myself about the guy.
The CIA guy.
No, he was an intelligence officer. He's not in the CIA. He's in another agency. And but as I say, I've known him a long time. For other reasons, nothing to do with this. And I thought, what in the hell did I remember that or not? And I didn't know how to talk to him about it because, I couldn't very well say to someone who knew essentially nothing about this, hey, were you watching me have sex with an alien in my guest room?
He did know about the visitors, though, right?
He may have.
But why would you be involved with intelligence if it wasn't about this?
As a writer in the old days, you were called upon they wanted you to go places where a writer could be going without suspicion during the Cold War and report back on what you saw. And
they were using you as a spy?
Not a spy exactly, but sort
an agent?
No, no. I guess...
you were recruited?
I was recruited, yeah. I was recruited when I was at school in England, and I did a few things. I mean, not much. I did a few things when I was in...
For the MI6?
No, for the CIA in England. One thing, and it was absolutely ridiculous, and it didn't work. But
how old?
Oh, I would have been 21, 22. And then later in my 20s, I did a couple of other things that I don't want to talk about, not because I'm not even sure they're secret, but I just don't know. And, it was nothing big. I mean, I just went out and went to a country and looked around and took a few pictures.
Wow.
So
this is an amazing detail you left out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's not an amazing detail. It's just how many writers did it in those days? Many.
Really?
Yeah, of course. I mean, you got a free trip and all this stuff. And,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I wasn't asked to go on secret any places that were dangerous or anything. They just wanted pictures of, in this case, of someone walking out of a restaurant because that was it. And
okay.
I guess they didn't want one of their officers to be seen doing it because in the place I was in, every CIA officer was well known to the local authorities.
Okay, so
it was just a tourist taking chance pictures. Is what.
So he wasn't connected to these visitors at all.
Not
he
at all. This had nothing to do with them.
You had
and it was before that, and it was basically a young guy getting a free trip. And that's all it was.
Okay. So you woke up, you had this experience of having amazing intercourse with this female hybrid
and
alien.
this guy is there.
And this guy's in the background watching.
Right. Now, as life unfolds, it turns out he's heavily involved in this visitor stuff. And I think to myself, should I ask him about it? So I ask him. I've asked him a few times, have you ever been to my cabin? He always says no. And I didn't know what to make of that because, in fact, people can do things, and I think my father might have been such a person for the visitors that they don't remember. And I probably have that in my life too. I think everyone I think they control the stream of your memory when it comes to them.
Okay.
They don't probably care about the rest of it. They control that.
What do you think that was at Roswell? What do you think crashed?
Oh, I can tell you precisely what crashed. Why it crashed, I can't tell you. It was a device containing 3 entities, which were part of the device, essentially. They were biological entities, and supposedly one of them was still alive when it was brought to right, but General Exon didn't say anything about that. The only thing, and he didn't tell me this directly, he told one of my relatives this, that he had held one in his arms, and it was like a big insect. That was his precise description. My uncle said that he didn't refer to the bodies. He referred only to the debris and the object, which he said was somewhat intact. And so they had, from Roswell, partially intact object and some debris and bodies.
3 bodies.
3 bodies. And Walter Haut, who was the press officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, left an affidavit, which was published by his family after he died, describing all of this, the bodies and so forth, in great detail. And he said to me, I went out to Roswell to talk to him. He said he wouldn't talk about the bodies. I asked him point blank, were there bodies? And he was simply silent. He wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no, because he didn't like to lie. He was a very straight-up guy, straight-ahead guy, Walt was. And so he left this is as much as he could do. And Colonel Jesse Marcel left a videotape with, thanks to Stanton Friedman, where he describes in detail the debris that he found and brought in to his home in his station wagon with his little boy, who Dr. Marcel passed away just a couple of years ago, who attested to this story also.
Right.
So it happened.
Have you ever heard Annie Jacobson's account of this crash?
I don't think it's correct. Yes, I do know it very well.
It seems really compelling. I know I know a lot of people aren't a fan of that theory, but it's interesting that she's the only one that talks about it, and no one else seems to appreciate it or take it seriously at all. You think the guy who told her, essentially for people that are listening, there's Annie Jacobson wrote in her book Area 51 that there was an engineer of a private aerospace company or something like that who was working in Arizona or Nevada who told Annie under anonymity that the device that crashed in Roswell was a Wright brothers or something engineered craft, like some sort of human-made flying saucer with children that were surgically manipulated to look like aliens from the Nazi Mengele, his name was.
Yeah, I know the story, but go ahead and tell it because
so people who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah,
and essentially, Stalin sent the craft over here, remote controlled it over here, and crashed it with these children, these Russian children that were deformed by this Nazi, to sow chaos within the United States.
Okay, I can tell you a lot about that and where that comes from.
And let me just finish the end of it. She asked this guy, Stephen, you could probably find his name if you just Google Annie Jacobson, engineer Roswell. I find out who his name actually was. She actually talked about it on Lex Friedman's podcast recently. And she asked him later, she goes, why wouldn't you make this public? Why is this such a big secret? Why are you waiting until you're essentially on your deathbed to tell me this? Why didn't you guys say, because if you guys would have let the public know when this happened, it would not hurt the image of America. It would hurt the image of Russia because it makes them look like, sickos. It makes them look like sinister people. The fact that they would do something like this. And his response to Annie was, because we started doing the same thing as soon as we found what they did. As soon as we found out that they were altering children and doing this stuff in Roswell or in Russia, we started experimenting with the same thing. And we know that in I think it was the 70s and 80s, that there was projects going on the East Coast of the United States where they were injecting children with plutonium and all kinds of, nuclear material to test on them. And I think Bill Clinton shut it down in like the early 90s.
I don't know anything about that, and therefore I can't speak of it. Mm-hmm. But what I can speak of is what I do know. I'll circle back for a moment to General Exon and my uncle. Before I published Communion, I knew nothing about General Exon, and I knew nothing about my uncle's work in the Air Force. Mm-hmm. Nothing. Nobody in the family did. I knew one thing about it. One thing, which was that he had seen when they blew off a gigantic hydrogen bomb. The Russians did in 1959, I think. And I happened to be staying at an aunt and uncle's house in Washington at the time with a friend, and suddenly my uncle shows up. The aunt and uncle were on vacation in Spain, and he told me, I asked him, because I knew he was an intelligence officer, I just didn't know what he did, and I said, what do you think of this massive H-bomb that went off, they blew off in Russia? He said, oh, I saw it. It's the size of a football field. Mm-hmm. And I thought, he saw it? How did he see it? And I said, when did you see it? He just laughed and didn't say anything more. Huh. So he was in other words, he was deep in this in Air Force intelligence, apparently. Right. Now, after Communion was published, he suddenly telephones me. At this point, he's in retirement at Retirement Village in Lackland, at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. Says, Whitty, I want you to come down. I've got some things I would like to talk about that have to do with your book. Mm-hmm. And I hung up and I said to Ann, my wife, I said, Mickey's going to talk to me about my book. Can you believe this? And so I go down, and he and his wife and me and Ann have a lunch. And he talks about the debris and the object, as he put it. I didn't ask him directly about bodies because it didn't occur to me at the time. I hadn't done much. I hadn't been to Roswell yet, for example. Right. And I had been to Roswell, but I hadn't. In any case, the bodies didn't come up. Mm-hmm. He may have alluded to him. I've never been sure. I'm trying to remember if I always say that he didn't say anything about the bodies, and I don't think I asked him anything about them directly. I did ask General Exon about them, and he said that he and General Exon had worked on this project at Wright Pat, mm-hmm. at Wright Field at the time, and right. Air Materiel under General Twining, and who was the head of Air Materiel at the time. And he told me about the debris, and as I say, I think he alluded to the bodies, may not have. And he introduced me to General Exon, who I talked to on the phone a number of times, who told me a great deal about the whole thing, much more than Mickey did, because he'd been a higher level officer at the time. I think Mickey was a major and he was a colonel at the time. And General Exon said, and I'm quoting him, and he's been quoted in a unfortunate public interview that's in a book by Don Schmidt and Randalls and Schmidt, that everyone from Truman on down, as he put it, knew that what we had found was not of this world within 24 hours of our finding it. Mm-hmm. Now, let's go back to the story of the altered children.
Yes. And by the way, just a quick aside, the guy's name is Alfred O'Donnell. That's and he was an EG&G engineer. This is the guy who told
EG&G Rotron.
So can you copy and paste his name into a new tab so we can get some more background on that guy? Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So this is where I think that story comes from. Immediately, here is the situation, the world situation as it stood at that time. Stalin has 4.5 million soldiers, fully equipped, largely with top-notch American equipment, on the what is now beginning to be called the Iron Curtain Line. Mm-hmm. NATO, or rather the Allies, are telling Churchill and I guess de Gaulle and Truman that this army can move across Western Europe in 6 weeks, and in all probability will be able to successfully invade England because the West has demobilized and they have not. So what is preventing them? Why don't they do it? There's one thing on the planet that's preventing them. It is the 509th Bomb Wing at Roswell, which is believed to be equipped with nuclear weapons.
Right.
And can deliver them to Russia. And Stalin knows that his radars and his anti-aircraft systems are not sufficiently robust to guarantee that all of the planes will be destroyed. Right. So the biggest secret on the planet upon which the door of history is hinged is that bomb wing right there at Roswell.
Right.
Do they really have the bombs or not? What is the situation? Now, I was told by somebody it was at the base, and he was an older man, and I don't remember his name. I'm not in the business of not saying names, by the way. I try to say all the names I can remember. Okay. But this is a guy who he told me that they did not have all of the planes. Only a couple of the planes were actually operational at that time. And the result of this was the immediate thought when they found the debris and wreckage 30 miles north of Roswell, an apparent balloon, the fear was that he had sensitive equipment on there that could have detected the level of radiation coming from the base if he'd gotten near enough, and determined from that whether or not there were really bombs on the base. And this caused a tremendous upset. That's why when the disk story was being disseminated by Walter Haut, it was suddenly killed by the Pentagon, because they weren't afraid of aliens. They'd never even heard. Understand, in those days, that idea was not something people thought about. Mm-hmm. People from another planet, we don't hardly even, maybe they'd think we were from Mars or something. They had no information, nothing like what we have now about outer space. Mm-hmm. So their immediate thought was, these were Russians. And because they were small, the assumption was they were children. And then the cover story was the story that they were altered children.
Yeah, but that was never, the story about them being altered children was never released into the public officially.
No, but it went all over the Air Force. It went all over the Air Force because my uncle mentioned it. He said that was the story that was told in the Air Force, that was what was told.
Okay.
And because he was definite, Art was definite about the bodies. He said they were not human at all. And in fact, well, I know they weren't human. I'm quite certain of it. And
you know for a fact?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Well, it'll all come out. I was recruited. I was in the living room when they came and recruited me, 2 Air Force officers. They recruited me, asked my parents if I could join this program for Bright Children, which was a special education program at Randolph. And I was amazed. And I said, and they didn't let you join? I said, no. He said, no, when they mentioned a Skinner box, my parents said they didn't want me involved because they didn't think that was a good idea. And the idea as it must have been told to my parents, I was not present when I was recruited, and therefore I don't know what was said to them, that the child would be placed in this box that would use repetitive teaching for high-speed learning of advanced subjects. That was probably what they were told, because that was what the other parents were told. And so this boy did not get into this program, but I did get into it. I got into it in July of 1952. I thought for a while it was earlier, but it was not earlier. It was July of 1952, and I'll tell you why I know that. It was extremely stressful. I went on Thursdays, and I was I don't remember anything about it except being confined and there being a very loud noise involved. That's all I remember.
Confined.
Yeah, I was like, I guess I was in the Skinner box. But that's what they said. The parents of the other boy.
Skinner box?
Skinner, B.F. Skinner was a psychologist who practiced in the 1950s, who came up with an idea of a high-speed learning system where the person was placed in this box and was fed repetitive learning, as I understand it.
Okay.
But I don't remember any repetitive learning. I remember really loud noise.
Okay.
And in any case, I was in the Skinner box. I guess that being in the Skinner box must have been very stressful, because when I was going to school in that fall, I began to get all kinds of illnesses. I couldn't go to school for a few days without coming down with another cold. And they took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, he has no white blood cells. He's under tremendous stress of some kind. And they took me out of that. And where did I end up being treated for this lack of an immune system? Was at Brooke General Hospital, again, a military hospital. And they gave me shots of gamma globulin, and I remember very vividly because the needles were huge, and I was a little boy, and these were doctors who were only used to dealing with adults. And one time, and maybe more than one, the needle went all the way through my arm, and gamma globulin went down my chest. So, and I was there for a few days and very scared because I was alone, and I was in isolation. And there was a sheet over the door, as I recall, and no one would come in. And when they did come in, they had masks on, and it was very scary. In fact, it scares me now thinking back on it. Anyway, soon I was sent home, and I was isolated. I couldn't go. I could get my food only in my bedroom. And then during the day, when my sister was gone, I could go downstairs and go in the backyard and stay in the backyard. And so I was out of school from October through January, until January. Interestingly enough, when my mother died, I found one thing she had saved from all of my school years, which was my report card from that year with all of the nuns' neat handwriting, absent due to illness for all of those months. And I showed it to my sister, and she said, "How did you get this?" My sister was 18 months older than me. She's deceased now. And I said, "Well, it's in Mother's box, her keepsakes." She said, "She should never have kept this." And I said, "Well, I'm going to keep it." The next thing I knew, it had disappeared. And my sister told me she didn't know where it was. She took it and hid it or threw it out. For some reason, she did not want that known.
That you missed school.
No, she didn't want the evidence. And I don't know whether she was programmed to do it or she knew more about it than I did or not. I don't know. Because maybe Mother had talked to her about it. I think Mother felt very guilty about it. That's why she would save that all those years.
What do you think was going on? What do you think they were doing to kids like you at this military base that was this progressive learning that was stressing you out so much that it killed your immune
progressive
system?
Learning. I have theorized about it. I can't remember anything except the loud noise. This is my living memory.
Mm-hmm.
I even have started a novel about it called The Changeling, which I'm never going to finish because nobody will buy my fiction, only my nonfiction. And I want to eat. So I just anyway. Maybe I will finish it, and my kids can publish it after I die. It'll tell the whole story, the novel, as fiction. But what I will say now is that I think they might have been trying to get me to leave my body, or something like that. It was not.
So some sort of like MK Ultra spinoff or something.
It was right before MK Ultra started, and I think it had something to do with that sort of thing. But that's just a wild guess, really. There could be any number of things they were trying to do. I mean, who knows? God, one thing I do know, whatever they were trying to do, it was total BS. And it just hurt a little boy terribly. They should pay me for that, but they never will. The records, they're always looking for these records in this disclosure, and Congress is demanding that the records be brought forward. And then the DOD says, we don't have any records. And they're not lying because they've offloaded them to the defense industry. So they don't have to be. FOIA doesn't matter.
Right.
The records aren't there. In any case, as Arthur Exon told me long ago, he was a close friend of my uncle's, and they were both at Wright Field at the Air Materiel Command when the debris and bodies were brought in.
From Roswell?
From Roswell, yeah, in July of 1947. So no one can tell me it didn't happen because it did. Mm-hmm. As I didn't get lied to by my own family and a good friend like General Exon, who was a very distinguished officer and also was commandant of Wright-Pat for a long time. So
what do you think that was at Roswell? What do you think crashed?
Oh, I can tell you precisely what crashed. Why it crashed, I can't tell you. It was a device containing 3 entities, which were part of the device, essentially. They were biological entities, and supposedly one of them was still alive when it was brought to Wright, but General Exon didn't say anything about that. The only thing, and he didn't tell me this directly, he told one of my relatives this, that he had held one in his arms, and it was like a big insect. That was his precise description. My uncle said that he didn't refer to the bodies. He referred only to the debris and the object, which he said was somewhat intact. And so they had, from Roswell, partially intact object and some debris and bodies.
3 bodies.
3 bodies. And Walter Haut, who was the press officer at the Army Air Base in Roswell, left an affidavit, which was published by his family after he died, describing all of this, the bodies and so forth, in great detail. And he said to me, I went out to Roswell to talk to him. He said he wouldn't talk about the bodies. I asked him point blank, were there bodies? And he was simply silent. He wouldn't say yes, he wouldn't say no, because he didn't like to lie. He was a very straight-up guy, straight-ahead guy, Walt was. And so he left this is as much as he could do. And Colonel Jesse Marcel left a videotape with, thanks to Stanton Friedman, where he describes in detail the debris that he found and brought in to his home in his station wagon with his little boy, who Dr. Marcel passed away just a couple of years ago, who attested to this story also.
Right.
So it happened. Nobody understands what caused Christianity to come about, because the religious scholars who write about it are all coming mostly from a religious standpoint.
Yes.
But there's another way of looking at it entirely. Like, people think that some malignant force caused the destruction of the Roman Empire. You know what caused it? The sun caused the destruction of the Roman Empire.
The
and
sun?
how did this happen? Well, from about 500 BC to 100 AD, there was something in the Mediterranean basin known as the Roman climate optimum. That is to say, the climate of the Mediterranean basin was ideal for the growing of crops, and the seasons were very regular. The result of this is the Roman Empire comes about, its population grows enormously, they build roads, they have sea lanes, they have a number of large cities, including mainly Rome, but others that require very substantial food services, and in a world where the transportation of foodstuffs is very challenging. So this is where we are in 100 AD, when, as we know from stalagmites that have been measured in a cave in Scotland, the solar output increased slightly. Mm-hmm. And it does that every once in a while.
Right.
It increases some and decreases some.
Right.
And when that happened, the Mediterranean basin went into a protracted state of drought. And all of a sudden, all of these people couldn't get food. The result is their immune systems become stressed because they are malnourished. We then have the first great Roman plague, because these people, they have no germ theory, they have compromised immune systems because they're malnourished because of the solar activity, the change in solar output. They're moving around the area as they did not certainly before even 1 AD. I mean, it's really a going concern at that point. Mm-hmm. The first plague occurs, the Aurelian plague, the plague at the time of Marcus Aurelius, which causes such disruption and depopulation that at one point he's got to sell the furniture and the contents of the imperial palace in Rome in order to keep the country's army paid. Mm-hmm. So it's a big upset. Now, this is a world in which the religion and the state are it's not just church and state. They're the same thing. If you are a Roman, the Roman gods are Rome. They are Rome. Jupiter and Venus and all of the different Roman gods, Mars, they are Rome. They are the personification of your state. And your state and your gods are essentially the same. So everyone, of course, runs to places like the temples of Asclepius, the healer, to get healed. Now, in those days, you did not, when you did the sacrifice, it had to hurt. You didn't just go in and, throw a couple of coins in. You went in and you took a bullock, or you took something of value to yourself, something that would be a significant sacrifice, and you gave it to the god. And in return, the god was supposed to help you, mm-hmm. to heal you. Mm-hmm. Plague after plague came, and the gods didn't help them. About 300 AD, there hasn't been a plague for a while, but the relationship between the people and the gods has deteriorated to the point that the temples are now starving. No one bothers. They don't hate them yet. They're starting to, but they don't hate them yet. And they are stopping sacrifice. Constantine, who was a political genius, realizes this problem and sees that the social fabric of the empire is declining. There's crime, there's inflation, there's all kinds of problems. He also sees that his mother is a member of one little cult called the Christians, who believe that this Jewish rabbi from Jerusalem was a special representative of God. And they have something called the Didache, which is a rule of life that has enabled them to remain intact through all the plagues, because they have this tight social unit that takes in the orphans and that that they have the paraboneri who go out and help the people who are sick, even at risk of their own lives. In other words, it's a very powerful social organization, and it's intact. And he brings that into the Roman Empire and announces that Christianity is the new religion of the Roman Empire. But he does it this way. He moves the birthplace of Jesus, which was probably Nazareth, to Bethlehem, and places him in a cave, the birthplace in a cave that was traditionally the cave where Venus gave birth to Adonis. In other words, he replaces the Venus and Adonis story with the story of the Holy Family. And Jesus takes on the trappings of a Roman god, essentially a sun god. Mm-hmm. He replaces Adonis as I am the way, the truth, and the light, and becomes Christianity. Now, this is good and it's bad. It's good because it preserves the teachings of Jesus, at least some of them. It's bad because the plagues continue, and because of the plagues continuing, the Christian parts of the empire become venomously angry at the gods. Because in those days the gods were the statues. The statue of Apollo in the temple of Apollo was the god. And they were specially treated so that the spirit of the god could come into the statue. It was all very now. So the people start to destroy the gods. They tear down the temples. They break the statues. That's why all those statues from there have broken noses and no arms broken off, because they were being beaten with hammers because the people were trying to kill the gods, because they had decided these plagues were so bad that, for example, at one point, Constantinople was so depopulated, the emperor had to send the army out into the hinterlands to force people to repopulate the city. I mean, it was horrendous. It was unimaginable. It makes COVID look like a picnic. And through all of this, gradually, the entire old religion is destroyed. There are a number of libraries that are destroyed. The one that we always think about, of course, is the library at Alexandria, which went slowly over a period of time. The killing of Hypatia was that's what we should remember as the worst thing that happened there, because the destruction of the library was not an intentional burning in one go. It was a gradual decline in interest and activity and a series of fires, some of which were probably set. And so we lost a lot. And the fact that the Antikythera device is so sophisticated, and we have no idea, we have no record of it. No one wrote anything about it. We didn't even know what it was built for until recently. That's because those records were all destroyed, I'm sure, in the destruction of the knowledge of the classical world. But the knowledge of the classical world was destroyed because people thought that those gods had turned against them, and they demonized their own gods. Well, there's a very interesting part of Jesus' A New Vision, which is about the resurrection and about what is actually known about the Shroud of Turin. Now, I recently on my website, there's a significant social media section of it. Someone put up a thing saying, I don't believe that there was a resurrection because Jesus died on the cross and there was nothing that happened on the cross that was unusual in any way. He simply died. And I thought to myself, this is very clever.
He died early.
Well, he died early, yeah, but and it's possible. Of course, it's possible there was a twin, and it's also possible that he wasn't really dead when he was put into the tomb. But that's not what the story of the Shroud of Turin tells. The Shroud of Turin tells a very strange story, and no matter how hard the conventional scientific community has worked to debunk that story, it's still there. The mystery still exists. Back in, the 70s, Ann and I were introduced to two Air Force officers, Jackson and Jumper, who wanted to test the Shroud of Turin. It was Father Peter Rinaldi who introduced us to this project. And we contributed a little money to it. We would have contributed more, but we didn't have more. Mm-hmm. And so we were very involved in the Shroud of Turin project. And as soon as I heard that the testing was going to be done at Oxford, I knew it would be false. And I wrote, I believe, Father Rinaldi saying, do not do this. They cannot afford to have their paradigm destroyed, and they will tell lies, and not even intentionally. They will do it in all good faith, but they will still be false. And indeed, if you look carefully, you will find that the parts of the shroud that were taken were too close to the burn marks from the 15th century fire to give accurate carbon dating. They were going to give carbon dating later than the shroud actually it was. And so that carbon dating is not correct. And they will stand by it because they did it very carefully and very correctly, but they did it to the wrong area. And they may not even consciously be aware of that, but that's what happened. There has been extensive research done into the shroud since then. Mm-hmm. There's a wonderful book out called Test the Shroud, about the shroud and about the work that's been done so far and what needs to be done additionally. And it's quite convincing because I think there's truth to it. Among other things, the image is burned into just the absolutely top micro, just the top edges of the linen in the cloth. Mm-hmm. And that could only happen with a very high intensity, very sudden flash, very high intensity, very sudden. Mm. There was, remember, an earthquake, and the temple was the drape in the temple was torn. Probably something happened in the tomb at that moment. Mm. And this is where we get into the area that the Western mind does not want to accept yet. And it's not just this. It's a whole lot more, that there is a large part of human experience and human reality that we have turned off. We have put blinders on ourselves. We've gone blind to our own souls. We don't believe we have them even, but they are the only thing that matters. And believe me, the visitors know that. If you're around them very much, they're real interested in your soul. And some of them want your soul to be screwed up because then they can get it when you're dead and they can do what they want with you. And God knows what that is, but it's certainly not going to be good news.
So these visitors, they don't have good intentions necessarily.
They have
selfish intentions, would you say?
You have to look at them the same way we look at ourselves. And when we look at ourselves, we see a huge, complicated mass of different beliefs, different intentions, different desires, different levels of intelligence, all of that. They're the same. They are just as complex, if not more so, and probably more so because they are older and they do have abilities that we do not have anymore, although I think we did in the past, as Jeff Kripal talked about on this show, actually, and about the ability to fly and so levitate and so forth. We've turned all that off. We turned it off for a very good reason. 1,000-year oppressive religious dictatorship that was stifling knowledge.
Christianity.
When on the nature of things, Lucretius's poem was rediscovered in Germany in the 14th century and was reprinted all over Europe. Suddenly, the idea of the scientific method was rekindled in the mind of the people of the Renaissance, and this is where people like Galileo and Copernicus were coming from. Right. And Giordano Bruno, they were trying to become scientists in a world that would definitely burn you to death if you weren't careful, which happened to Bruno. Right. And we shook that off of ourselves, off of our backs. And now any sign of any interest in that level of human reality terrifies our intellectuals, because they think, my God, if we let this out, the next thing we know, religious fundamentalists are going to be back in control and we're all going to be burned again. Our lives will be destroyed. And if you look at Project 25, you can see it written right there.
Project 25, is that the thing that
That's that thing that's sort of in the
that like extreme right-wing agenda thing that came out?
Yeah, whether it's would ever be adopted by anyone, I don't know, but it's there.
No, I don't think. Yeah, I saw that.
And I've read. It's 900 pages long, and I have to admit that I read an outline of it, and I paged through it. And basically, it's a return to the medieval world.
Yes, I agree.
Basically, it's what it is.
Yeah, I tend to think when things like that come out that they're just like intentional things to divide society and to create and maintain control and things to.
Well,
nope. I've heard some of the people come out, like Trump and some other people, right-wing people, that people have been questioning them about this Project 2025 thing, and they're completely like ripping it to shreds, saying like, I don't know where this is coming from. This is like an extreme right-wing thing, like.
Yeah,
we don't,
unless it's actually created by the extreme left wing in order to make the right wing look bad.
Exactly, right.
I mean, it could be anything.
There's so much deception going on. You can't keep anything straight.
I'm not in that world, and I'm not going to go into politics of Trump and Harris now. But I'm just saying that exists.
Yes,
and it is a return to what we were before the Renaissance.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And I don't think.
We're not.
I don't think real people take that kind of stuff seriously.
We're not going to go there.
No, definitely not.
They have to face the fact that we're free now, and ultimately we're going to stay that way.
Yes.